folks. The night of October 16th, 1859, John Brown, that radical abolitionist who's made a name for himself at Potawatomi Creek Massacre in Kansas, murder of 5 pro-slavery settlers during the Kansas-Nebraska Wars of the 1850s, is going to come here. He's going to come in from Maryland at the head of a provincial army. Several goals in mind. Seize the armory, this arsenal complex down here. You can see the foundations. This is where 100,000 of the world's most technologically advanced military firearms will be stored, quite literally like cordwood, in this building and the smaller one there. Brown's going to come here with his army, capture these 100,000 weapons, capture that armory, and indeed the entire town. He's going to do that with 18 men. And his mission is to take these weapons, rise a slave army, then fight a guerrilla war in the Allegheny Mountains of Western Virginia and carve out a new nation where there will be no slavery. Well, indeed, Brown's mission that first night is very successful. They're going to capture these weapons, capture that armory, capture the entire town. But the following morning, things are just going to start to go wrong from the start. Those armory workers start to stir and come down from their apartments. They're not going to hear the ominous ringing, the little bell up there in that engine house. That's the most obscure building in this entire complex. So our federal arsenal, armory, is going to run for 600 yards up there on Potomac Street. 22 buildings on either side of the large tunnel-like complex bringing in the water power. That's going to be the only building that's not going to produce a single part for these weapons. In that building is simply going to be the firefighting equipment and a small shed for the night watchman to stay during the winter months to make sure those fires are extinguished. Well, they're not going to hear that bell ringing that morning, and they're going to wonder what's occurring. So some of them look up that armory yard. They're going to be captured by men at the gates. Men at the gates with guns. Well, that's nothing new. That's what they make there. They make firearms for that factory. But as some of them look up there, they're going to see something that lets them know exactly what's going on. Because they're going to see a black man with a gun. An African American in Virginia in 1859 with a firearm does not exist. That's going to let them know that there's a slave rebellion underway. What scares them the most is that there are white men with them. You no longer know who the enemy is. Very quickly, they're going to return to their quarters, get their own firearms, and begin fighting back against Brown's raiders. By that night, Brown's situation is perilous. 8 of his men are dead on the streets of Harper's Ferry, while the remaining 5 and 11 hostages are held up in that little engine house. Brown's escape route is shattered. The following morning, a company of 90 U.S. Marines under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee is going to be ordered to storm that engine house and take out Brown. In 3 minutes of battle, 2 more of the raiders will die, 3 of them will be captured, and 11 hostages will be freed. Brown, very quickly, however, is going to be turned over to the state of Virginia. Because even though this is Harper's Ferry National Armory, a federal installation, the situation with slavery is grown so volatile that President Buchanan does not want to risk civil war. He will leave that to another president. So Brown's going to be taken 5 miles from here to Charlestown, where he's going to be tried for 3 days. He's going to be found guilty and convicted of inciting murder, treason, and servile insurrection. He's going to be sentenced to death on December 2nd, 1859. Before he goes to the gallows, however, he's going to give a small slip of paper to one of his jailers. It's going to state, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I have, as I then now vainly flattered myself, that without very much bloodshed it might be done." But whether the old man was a prophet, we don't know. But exactly 18 months to the day that he was captured in that little engine house, the bloodiest conflict in this nation's history will come from Harper's Ferry. Because on April 12, 1861, Civil War will start in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. On the 15th, President Lincoln is going to call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. 2 days after that, Virginia is going to vote to leave the Union. Now we have this United States Armory in the South. It's going to be among the first targets for the newly formed Virginia's militia to come and capture. At this time, there's only a small force of 45 U.S. soldiers protecting this complex, making sure another John Brown doesn't happen. This arsenal here has been quite literally cleaned out. Those 100,000 weapons that were stored here, there's only about 15,000. The rest have been given to the militia to form and fight their freedom in their own new country. But indeed now, we are in this seat of civil war. So this is Virginia, and across the river there is the United States. It's a very critical border location. You control Harper's Ferry, you're going to control the Shenandoah Valley. That valley is the main invasion route going north or south. It's also going to provide that Confederacy with about half of its foodstuffs. So with that in mind, on the night of April 18, 1861, Lieutenant Roger Jones, a young West Pointer, is going to order this arsenal and that armory destroyed. The explosion is going to be so great, you could be sitting up the top of Loudon Heights, that mountain to the rear of you, reading a book at midnight, clear as day. 15,000 of these small arms will go up in an instant. About 20% of that armory will also be destroyed. So 60 years of weapons manufacturing here at Harper's Ferry will go up in an instant. But those armory workers and townspeople will go in and fight those flames out there at the armory. They've already been paid to make the guns here. However, they realize that armory is the key to this town. Without that armory, all those businesses will simply dry up and go away. So they'll go into that little engine house where John Brown launched his raid. They'll pull up the firefighting equipment and put out the fires. They're going to save about 80% of that machinery. Well, 2 days later, an eccentric professor from the Virginia Military Institute named Thomas Jonathan Jackson is going to come and take command of the militia here. Very quickly, Jackson is going to order that machinery shipped south to Richmond, where they will begin manufacturing very quickly weapons very similar to what were made here at Harper's Ferry for the Confederacy. So indeed, there's going to be many battles during that Civil War, where American will meet American on the field of battle, each carrying a Harper's Ferry weapon. But indeed now, with the Civil War fully underway, Harper's Ferry will prove to be that critical border location. And during the 4 years of seething hell that lie ahead, this town will see the very best and the very worst that war can bring. We'll see now. One of those